Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiao Chin and I'm moderating the ninth YouTube session of the ninth fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in this session. And you can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the fabulous mystery, suspense, fantasy, and YA author, Carol Goodman. Hi, Carol. Welcome to Read for Pixels.
Hi, Xiaojin. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, we are so happy you could make it. And just to give a little bio on Carol, she is the New York Times best-selling author of 24 novels, including the urban fantasy Black Swan Rising trilogy with her husband Lee Slonimsky.
Got it. First try.
Lovely. Under the cute pseudonym of Lee Carroll, and the fantasy Fairwick Chronicles as Juliet Dark. She's a winner of the Hammett Prize and two-time winner of the Mary Higgins Clark Award. She enjoys exploring folklore, myth, and history as sources of inspiration for her writing, as well as the Hudson Valley in the United States, where she lives with her family and teaches literature and writing at the New School and SUNY New Paltz. Now, aside from being with us here today, Carol has also generously donated a ton of fabulous goodies to the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. And the good news is that all of these goodies are available to donors worldwide. Now, okay, so this is a long list. So the first one, the Visitors 50-50 Matching Donation Treat. Carol is offering an unusual treat that will double the impact of your Read for Pixels donation. Now, as you can see, if you donate $50 to us, Carol will send you a collectible, signed and personalized first edition hardcover of The Night Visitors for your reading pleasure. And she will also give a matching $50 donation to the domestic violence shelter run by Family of Woodstock in Ulster County, New York, United States, where she volunteers. There are only 3 of this wonderful treat available. Second, the Carol Goodman Books and Map Starter Bundle. If you're new to Carol's books or are a book collector, Carol is offering 2 starter bundles, which include, there you go, signed and personalized US edition trade paperbacks of 5 of her most recent novels. The Disinvited Guest, which just came out this year, The Stranger Behind You, The Sea of Lost Girls, The Night Visitors, The Other Mother, and 1 exclusive print of a map of the world of The Disinvited Guest, which is hand-drawn by her daughter, there you see it, to accompany the book. Both Carol and her daughter will sign the map for the donor. Now, third is Carol Goodman's The Disinvited Guest Book Plus Map Bundle. So this is a smaller book and map bundle featuring 1 signed and personalized first edition hardcover of The Disinvited Guest and 1 print of the hand-drawn map of the world of The Disinvited Guest, which will also be signed by Carol and her daughter. And there are 3 of these bundles available. There, that's the bundle.
There we go.
And fourth is Carol Goodman's The Stranger Behind You bundle. If you're looking for a goodie with an extra personal touch from Carol, she's offering 2 of this bundle that has 1 signed and personalized first edition hardcover of The Stranger Behind You and 1 handwritten personal note from Carol to the donor. Fifth is Carol Goodman's Blythewood hardcover bundle. So this young adult series chronicles the coming of age of Evelyn Hall at an elite boarding school that trains young women to defend human society from the shadowy forces that live among us. So if you're a fan of kick-ass feminist YA fantasy or know of one, Carol is offering signed and personalized US edition hardcovers of this trilogy, which includes Blythewood, Ravencliff, and Hawthorne. And finally, if you are new to Carol's books or looking for a gripping and twist-filled feminist mystery to read over the coming holiday season, do check out Carol Goodman's The Lake of Dead Languages. Carol has 3 signed and personalized first edition hardcovers of her very first book, The Lake of Dead Languages, waiting for their donors. Thank you so much for being such a lovely book model, Carol.
Since this is reversed, I couldn't tell which side to put it on.
Oh no, I think it was good. Yeah. So, unfortunately, this has been our slowest ever fundraiser as we have only raised $2,030 towards our $5,000 goal so far. So, please do give generously before the fundraiser ends in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. If you're watching this session live on YouTube, you will also be able to ask Carol's questions right now. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Juliana, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Carol to answer. And now over to Carol. What will you be reading for us today?
So I'm going to read from my book, The Stranger Behind You. And I'll give you a little bit of context first of the passage I'll be reading, because it comes about halfway through the book. The book, there are two narrators in the book, Joan and Melissa. And Joan is a reporter who has exposed a sexual predator and written a story about it, and is then attacked in her apartment. And she goes to live in a place that she thinks she'll be safer. And when she moves there, she meets a elderly neighbor named Lillian. Lillian explains to her that she's been in this apartment since it was a Magdalen laundry in the 1940s. And she begins to tell Joan stories about her life, including some incidents where she is involved with trying to catch somebody in Murder Inc. in Coney Island in the 1940s. So the episode that I'll be reading is Lillian telling this story to Joan, and I'll try to give you a little bit of context about who some of the characters are just before I read, so you'll know who they are.
Okay, so just to note everyone that Carol's excerpt will involve sexual assault. So if you feel that this will trigger you, please feel free to take a break and come back in about 10 minutes or so to continue with the discussion session with Carol. So the floor is yours, Carol.
Okay, thank you. Just to give a little bit, some of the names, Frank is the DA who is helping Lillian, or asking Lillian to spy on the mobster Eddie Silver. And Lillian's friend Rose also comes into this story. So here she is telling the story to Joan, who is a reporter, as I mentioned. Lillian launches into her story quickly today without any prompting from me. I've been thinking about what you asked me last time about whether Frank was offering me a deal to help Tommy in exchange for spying on Eddie Silver. Tommy's her younger brother. And I think you were right. Frank was very ambitious. He wanted to impress his boss, the DA, and put Eddie behind bars. If that meant using a pretty naive girl to help him, well, I don't really blame him. But I wasn't just a naive girl. I wanted to get Eddie Silver, too, and all the men like him who had preyed on my brother and gotten him in trouble. Tommy never would have had that gun if not for Eddie. That poor girl Arlene wouldn't have been killed, and Tommy wouldn't have been in prison. A different Lillian emerges as she talks, fierce, angry. That was very brave of you, I acknowledge. Oh, she says, laughing it off. I suppose I also fancied wearing new dresses and going to clubs. I'd been poor for so very long, it felt marvelous to have something new to wear and plenty to eat. My tips at the Stork Club for one night were more than I made in a week as a stenographer, and the chef always put aside food for me to take home, slabs of roast beef and dinner rolls and chocolate eclairs. I would have gotten fat if I hadn't spent the nights dancing. Her eyes are gleaming now, and I can picture this young Lillian seizing the chance to live life. Where would you go dancing, I ask. Oh, Roseland and the Savoy up in Harlem. We'd always end up at Prospect Hall in Brooklyn, though, because it was on the way home. Eddie would take a few of the girls with him and tell us to have a good time. He'd disappear in the back on business. My job was to remember the names of the men he met with and listen in on what they were talking about. But if you were on the dance floor, oh, Lillian says, a sly smile in her eyes, I would find reasons to go back there to ask Eddie to come out for a dance or because I wanted one of his expensive cigarettes. I recognized the men he was with because Frank had shown me pictures. There were the big bosses, Albert Anastasio and Frank Costello, and the hired guns like Joe Adonis and Abe Relis. Now, there was a man to make your blood run cold. They called him Kid Twist because of the way he liked to sneak up behind a man and slip a garrote over his neck and strangle him to death. Weren't you scared to be around men like that? I knew they wouldn't try anything because I was under Eddie's protection. And Eddie, she tilts her head and smiles at me. I bet you want to ask if he took advantage of me. It's true, I've been wondering what the relationship entailed, how far she'd been willing to go in her role of undercover agent, but I find myself shy of bringing up sex with this nice old lady. Though perhaps my reticence is doing a disservice to Lillian, maybe she wants to tell the truth after all these years. Yes, I say, returning her playful look with a serious one. If you're able to tell me, I imagine a man like Eddie would have expected sexual favors. Oh, but he didn't. At least not from me, Lillian exclaims, unembarrassed. You see, he still thought of me as his Irish Rose, his sweet lass from the old country. Never mind, I was born in Flatbush. His Roisin Dubh, he'd call me, his Black Rose, after an old Irish song. He never touched me, and he made it clear to his underlings that I was off limit. So you see, I was safe, at least until a shadow passes over her face, her bright green eyes turning as flat as corroded pennies. Until? I prompt. She sighs. Until I saw something I shouldn't. She takes a deep breath. For a moment, I think she won't be able to go on. I have to restrain myself from prompting her. And then when she starts again, the words spill out as if they've been building up inside her, waiting to escape. One night we were out and Eddie says, I have to pay a visit to an old friend who's staying in a hotel. We were in Brooklyn and he offered to drop me home if I was tired, but I said, no, I'm wide awake because I was thinking Frank would want to know about this friend. When we pulled up in front of the Half Moon Hotel in Coney Island, I knew I was right. The Half Moon Hotel jars a memory, but I can't grasp it. Because that's where the police were keeping Abe Relis, who had turned state's witness against the mob and was informing on all his former colleagues in exchange for immunity. Abe was on the top 2 floors, guarded by a dozen policemen, so I didn't think that's where we were going. And we weren't at first. We went to a suite on the 4th floor where a couple of fellows were sitting around smoking and drinking with a girl who turned out to be Rose. Seeing my surprise, she nods. I hadn't seen much of Rose since I'd taken her place at the Stork. You keep it, she told me. I have better ways to make a buck. I had a hunch what that better way was, and I guessed she was embarrassed for me to see what she'd become. I'd catch a glimpse of her every now and then on the arm of one mobster or another, one of whom must have brought her to the Half Moon that night. I barely recognized her. She had the glassy eyes of a doper, and she was dressed like a floozy. When she saw me, I was afraid she'd let on that my name wasn't really Rose, but she only laughed and said, well, look what the cat dragged in, fellas, secondhand Rose. Eddie laughed like it was a fine joke. 2 Irish roses, a couple more, and we'll have a bouquet. Just what we need to distract the boys in blue upstairs. Did he mean the policeman guarding Abe Relis? I asked. Yes, that's why Eddie brought me. He wanted Rose and me to entertain the police while he took care of Abe so that Abe couldn't testify against him and his friend. I tried to laugh it off. You know, I can't sing a note, Eddie. How do you expect me to entertain them? And he answered, I don't know, Lil, maybe by doing impersonations. I went cold all over when I realized he knew my real name, but Rose came to my rescue. Don't be sore, Eddie. Lil filled in for me one night. The 2 flowers of Mary Magdalene, we called ourselves back at St. Stephen's. Even the nuns mixed us up. That wasn't right. That wasn't right, Lillian tells me. And as if anxious, I get the details down. The rose and the lily were the 2 flowers of the Virgin Mary, but Rose was making a joke. Then she said to me, don't worry, Lil. I'll show you how it's done. She winked at me, and I thought it would be all right. At any rate, I didn't dare refuse, or Eddie would guess I'd been stringing him along the whole time. So I laughed and said I just needed to powder my nose. I went to the bathroom and looked out the window. There were police cars down below. Maybe I could get a message to Frank through them. But I also saw one of Eddie's goons pacing back and forth, and I knew if he saw me drop something out the window, it would get back to Eddie. So I ran cold water over my hands and freshened my lipstick and told my reflection in the mirror, "You can do this, Lillian." And I went out and said, "Let's go see those coppers." One of Eddie's guys took us to a room on the fifth floor, which I knew from what Frank told me was right below where they were keeping Relis. It was a suite with a bedroom and a sitting room. "Wait here," he told me, and rose. When he was gone, I turned to Rose. "What do they expect us to do?" I asked. "What do you think?" she said, lighting a cigarette and sitting down in a chair. Then she laughed. "Don't tell me you're not doing the same with Eddie, what with all the time you've been spending with him." When she saw my face, she stopped laughing. "Oh, my pure Lily, only you could manage to stay lily white in such a dung heap. Don't worry, I'll take care of you." Then Eddie's man was back with two policemen. "What did I tell you, boys? Two blushing Irish roses." One of the cops was big and red-faced, drunk already, and the other was young and skinny, a freckle-faced boy not much older than my Tommy. Rose turned on the radio and sashayed up to the big one and coaxed him into a big chair. "Let's get you fellows something to drink. Lil, why don't you ask that lug outside to get us some ice?" She did what she could to delay the inevitable. She plied her big guy with enough drink to sink a battleship and signaled me to do the same as she pulled hers by his tie into the other room. At first, I thought it was going to be all right. My fellow was so shy he could barely talk to me. Ernest was his name. He seemed relieved when I asked him questions about himself, and he launched into a long, boring history of his education and ambitions in law enforcement and how many push ups he did for his physical exam. "Your mother must be so proud of you," I said, thinking that mention of his mother might dampen his sex drive. But instead, he took it as an invitation to lunge across the settee at me. He was so clumsy, like a big wet dog, that I laughed, and he slapped me. Well, I was used to fighting in the street, so I slapped him right back. He looked surprised and then angry. He pinned me to the sofa and started grinding his hips against me. I tried to push him away. He wasn't very tall, but he was strong. All those push ups, I guess. And he was crushing me down into that big, soft couch, which smelled like mildew. A cushion fell over my face, or maybe he pushed it over my face, and suddenly I couldn't see or breathe. It felt like I was drowning. Her voice catches as if she really was choking, and I reach out to touch her hand. She grips mine as if I could pull her back to safety. I wrenched my neck around to get air. I remember "You Made Me Love You" was playing on the radio. I could see the table with the drinks and the window beyond. I kept my eyes on the window as if I could fly out of it. And that's how I saw the body fall. I screamed, but Ernest just covered my face with the cushion. I was going to die, I thought, just like the man who fell from the window. I was in a place of death. Lillian looked at me, and I see the terror in her eyes. She was in that room in the Half Moon Hotel, battling for her life 77 years ago. A piece of her was always in that room, just as a piece of me would always be on the threshold of my old apartment, feeling that hand over my mouth. I reached out and squeezed her hand. But then someone was pulling Ernest off me, the big cop, shouting, "Come on, lover boy, we got trouble." So she manages to escape and with Rose. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph before she gets to the police station, when she gets to back to Frank. "I told him about Eddie sending me and Rose upstairs to entertain the cops and how I thought Eddie had guessed I was a snitch. But when I got to the part up in the suite, well, I couldn't tell Frank about what happened on the couch. I don't know why. I somehow felt stupid that I'd gotten myself into that position. It's not uncommon among survivors of sexual assault," I tell Lillian, "to feel ashamed as if it were their own fault. It's what keeps so many victims silent." It's a little speech I've given a dozen times, but Lillian looks at me as if I've delivered the secret of the universe. "Yes," she says, squeezing my hand. I never told anyone what happened until now. Now it's my turn to tear up. I've been the first recipient of a number of sexual assault stories, but never one that had lain 77 years in the dark. So that's the end of that passage.
Thank you, Carol. That's a really powerful passage. Okay, so let's jump straight into the discussion. All your novels revolve around not just complex and interesting female protagonists like what we just heard, journalist Joan Lurie and Lillian Day, as well as society wife Melissa Osgood in The Stranger Behind You, and Claire Martin from The Widow's House, but also a varied cast of female characters like the school teachers and students from The Lake of Dead Languages and The Sea of Lost Girls. Who or what are your inspirations for your female characters?
Well, women, I guess so many women that I've known, so many strong women. Certainly, the passage I just read was very much inspired by my mother, which I can talk more about, but I'll say a little bit more about other women first, because she's the most obvious. I think everything
Mm,
I write comes from my mother. But also, you mentioned the students in Lake of Dead Languages, and a number of my books I've written about teachers and students. And as you mentioned, I'm a teacher. Whenever I stand in front of a classroom and, each new semester, I've just started a new one, I meet all these amazing young people and young women, and I'm really inspired by them so many times when I see what they're going through, what their ideas are, how brave and vocal they can be. I'm
mm,
very inspired by them, and really just the lives of all the women, the friends, that I've known over many years. Watching how their lives progress. There are so many women I've been inspired by, and some men who are strong allies to women, and who are, um, you know,
okay. Yeah, and as you mentioned, you also appear to draw inspiration from specific events in your mother, Margaret Agnes Catherine McGuckin Goodman's
oh,
life.
that's her whole name. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
For
well,
some of your novels. Mhm.
yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about that, because that it is so clearly the inspiration here between Stranger Behind You. So yeah, my mother, who passed away in 2016, she'd be 99 right now. She was born in
Mm,
1923. Um,
mm,
so I was a little later for that time. She had me when she was 35.
mm,
I have two older brothers, but I was the youngest. I was quite a bit younger than them, so it was almost like I was an only child. I grew up hearing her stories, and she
mm,
had kind of amazing life. She grew up like Lillian in The Stranger Behind You. She grew up in Coldwater Flats in Brooklyn. Her family were Irish, like second generation immigrants. They were incredibly poor. Um,
mm,
they really would sometimes not have anything to eat, but she would make me this treat sometimes, bread and milk and sugar, and she said that's what all we had to eat some nights. But my father
mm,
would make it into a big treat. So
mm,
she had this very, poor upbringing, and then but she said she was always, happy because she felt loved by her family.
mm,
Um, when she was 17, her mother died suddenly, and
mm,
she was left with, she was the oldest of four siblings at that point. Two brothers had died in infancy, and all her brothers were put into home Catholic orphanages because
mm,
her father started drinking and couldn't take care of them. And she, at 17, had to quit high school and go live with an aunt.
mm,
And she moved to Coney Island, where she lost all her, friends and connections, even though it was only like 15 minutes away on a subway. Apparently, Coney Island, different world than Bay Ridge.
yeah.
So I know it's a long story, but she, then really had to make her way in the world as a 17-year-old without any resources. And one of the things, so she told me all these stories as I was growing up. One of the stories she eventually told me, not at first, was that that she was sexually assaulted. And when
Mm,
she first told me about it, she told me almost you know, in almost a casual way. She said,
mm,
I was surprised I had never heard about it. Apparently she had been in a hospital when she was 18 to have her tonsils out, and a doctor in the middle of the night, a nurse came and told her to come to this examining room, and she was
mm,
told to take all her clothes off. And she said she shook so bad that the doctor didn't do anything to her. And that's what she told me.
mm,
I always wondered, was there something
mm,
else there? But
Wow.
so, she told me this story, and it took me a long time to realize how much she had been affected by this, that this had happened to her. And I actually don't think I understood, because she suffered terrible anxiety in her later life. And I
Mm,
don't think I understood what it meant to her until after she was gone. I was watching Christine Blasey Ford testify
mm,
about her assault, and she talked about the sequelae of that assault, and said that what she suffered from that teen, which happened when she was a teenager. She said she was claustrophobic. She had panic attacks. She couldn't sleep. And as Christine Blasey Ford listed all these things, I said, that was my mother. She slept
mm,
with light on her entire life. She had terrible claustrophobia. When I would take her to a doctor, she would shake, like,
mm.
and I realized, oh, my mother had this post-traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah.
Um, and I hadn't realized that before. So that was one of the inspirations behind writing this and the character of Lily. And I wanted to talk about what, for a character who had that happen to them, who never had told anyone before, um,
Mm,
like my mother.
yeah. Okay. And do you think that witnessing your mother's PTSD has helped you write about characters like Joan and Lillian, who are survivors of violence against women, more authentically?
Well, I hope so. I think, all we can do is take, the experiences that we know of, and, try to translate them into a fictional mode that will hopefully
Mm,
reach other people. Certainly it was what inspired me to. And when I thought of, how afraid my mother must have been in that moment in her
mm,
experience. And I thought about that when I wrote about Lillian, um, you know, at being, almost smothered into this couch.
mm,
I absolutely think her experience, all her experiences have helped me write about women. Um,
mhm.
you know, this one in particular, I hadn't even thought of writing about until, pretty,
Yep.
ways on in my career. It hadn't come first. Um,
Mm,
but, I think also just the act of her storytelling, uh,
mhm,
that she would tell me stories in order to, I think part of it was that she had never told these stories to anyone, so she was sort of reprocessing them, and I could hear her figuring them out, and they
yeah.
would change. Obviously, she didn't tell me that story when I was little. But
Mm,
when I was a teenager, and going out with boys, she would tell me about women who were, bad things happened to them. So
mm,
so it was also, I think it made me a storyteller. It made me, hearing her stories and hearing how she processed her
mm,
life and her experiences. And that's what I try to do, is I'm trying to process, really painful experiences in a fictional mode and through
mm,
story, hoping, I guess, to give, some, you know, some narrative. You're not going to give closure. You're not going to really
yeah.
give, there's nothing. Those experiences are so painful. There's nothing, you can't make them, you can't tie them up with a neat bow. But I feel that by giving them, a shape, and giving
Mm,
them, and also, hopefully a happy ending, a way of sort of coming out of that trauma.
yeah.
So I'm always trying to write out of that trauma, get my character through the act of telling, as
Mm,
Lillian does here to Joan. Um, that she'll find some release, and that's what I'm looking for when I'm writing, and what I hope my readers will get too. That by experiencing other people's, experiences and traumas, that they will see their way through their own.
mm. Yeah, and having gone through this thought process and your experience, can you share some tips and suggestions for portraying female characters in mystery and crime books who have experienced rape, domestic violence, or childhood sexual abuse without reducing them to the sum of their trauma?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Thank you.
Mm.
I have to think about it for a second, because that is the challenge, and especially I think in mystery, suspense fiction, which has often been accused of objectifying or profiting off of women victims. That's I think
Mm.
that's something that you have to be so careful about. That I guess what I always think, first of all, I try to be really genuine and true to the character. I really think about how I am portraying what happened to them. I want to be truthful, but I want to be I don't want to reduce it to a cliche of what happened. I want it to, I want it to be very particular. I want us to feel the whole picture. So all of that, I guess, just really, and thinking about, and I think about the effect it will have on people.
Mm.
What is the story I'm telling? What am I trying to convey by that? That doesn't mean that, not all the women characters in my books are going to be good.
Yes.
And that's something I've had to deal with. The villain can't. The villain sometimes is the man, but can't always be, and it's not.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, women are flawed as well. So I think just trying to be, I really try to, put myself in the place of the character. For instance, in The Stranger Behind You, the character Melissa is not a particularly, she's the wife of this predator that Joan has.
Yes.
And
Mm.
she does some pretty awful things.
Mm.
And
Mm.
yet, and she was hard to write, but the more I wrote her, the more I understood where she came from. So I guess having compassion. I think
Mm.
that'll be the thing I will sort of come down on, is having compassion and understanding, and trying to understand, how did this person get to be the person they are? What happened in their lives to get them to this place?
Okay. And perhaps the next question might be something similar, but perhaps you can add on to it. So,
Okay.
the mystery, crime, and suspense genre has its share of female stereotypes and tropes, from being fridged as a victim to motivate a male protagonist to being a psychopathic villain themselves, as we were just saying. So, how do you challenge such stereotypes and subvert such tropes to create female characters with complexity and agency when dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
All right. So, again, I think the most important thing is, first of all, to be aware of those. And when I was writing that scene with Lillian, which she's recounting something that happened in the 40s, so you very quickly fall into that sort of noir tough guy, in the mall, and
Mm.
the objectification. I watched when I was actually, I watched a lot of movies set in the 40s when I was
Mm.
writing that book, and also recently, because I've been working on a historical novel, and you watch them and you're like, look at these cliches. Women are either, they're either pure and untouched, or if they've had sex, they're game.
Yeah.
Anything goes. And so Lillian is dealing with that stereotype. When she says,
Mm.
um, "Oh, they wouldn't touch me because I was a good girl."
Mm.
So I think you have to look at those stereotypes head on, and
Mm-hmm.
and not fall into them. Um, and yet your characters may very well be prone to them. They might be
Mm.
acting on those stereotypes. And then for in terms of the villainous female character, um, if they, I mean, I've been working Melissa in this book. I came through to the point where, I don't want to spoil anything, but I came through to the point where I liked her, even when she was doing some questionable things, and she grew as a person. However,
Yeah.
I have had some characters who, nope, they don't grow. They're pretty bad, but I feel
Mm.
like they're, and so I've had some bad female characters, but I try to really, when I do have them, first of all, I try to balance, and that's
Right.
the thing, is that whenever you feel like you're straying into cliche, I think you really have to look at, who are all the characters in your book, and
Mm.
what can you do to balance that, and what can you do to challenge that. So if I feel myself falling into that pattern, I immediately ask myself, Well, gee, we would kind of expect this because of the sort of narrative, the way this usually happens. Can I subvert that? Can I change that?
Mm.
Can I create another character who balances that? And that's, and I'm not, I may not do it perfectly. I probably don't do it perfectly each time. I'm sure I fall victim to cliches as well. And in some of
Mm.
my early work, I remember I've gotten letters from people, never on the issue really of cliches, although once I got a complaint from a reader about a librarian who I depicted in sort of a cliche way.
Mm.
Because she was very kind of prissy and, uh, and when the person, and I read it, and at first I was kind of like, oh, it's just a character. And then I thought, she's right. And
Mm.
I was kind of appalled at myself. I said, I love librarians.
Mm.
I think librarians are the salt of the earth. But this character was cliche. And I wrote back and I said, I'm sorry.
Mm.
I'll think about that in the future, and I will try not to fall into that. So,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
not perfect.
Yeah. So we'll come back to readers and characters in the in the question after this one. So your books depict complex relationships between women, including female friendships and rivalries, as well as workplace relationships that will feel very real to many female readers. They also include references to aspects of life that women and girls have to navigate, including parenting as a single mother and postpartum depression, to sexual harassment at school and the workplace. Why do you think many mystery crime authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test,
Uh,
despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
Well, first of all, I hope I know a lot of a lot of mystery writers, both male and female, who do pass the Bechdel test. So thank
Yes.
goodness. And I certainly hope I do, because to me, the most interesting thing for two women to talk about is, not often another man. I think there are so many other things. And in my own life experience, we're not talking about, guys, we're talking about books and life and our
Yeah.
experiences, and so it shouldn't be hard, as far as
Mm.
I can see, to pass the Bechdel test, which again I believe I'm on the same page that it's two women having a conversation that is not about a man, uh,
Yes, that's right.
and they are doing that constantly in my, um, why do I think? I mean, the only thing I will say is that I think there is some pressure in commercial fiction, um,
Mm-hmm.
for there to be, and I haven't come across this aspect of it too much, the romantic plot,
Mm.
that sort of always has to be there, and probably more in romance fiction, but even in mystery, there is that element. So there is some pressure to, have them, have there be that element. What I find a little bit more that bothers me is that it's a depiction of having positive and interesting depictions of older women. And I say that as
Mm.
a woman, where I feel like there's a lot of pressure for the main character not to be old, um, you know,
Mhm.
not to be really beyond 30s and 40s. And as an older woman, I feel why,
Yeah.
I very much want to push against that. And some people, and the way I've found to do that is, quite frankly, to have dual narrators, like in The Stranger Behind You, where I have
Mhm.
an older woman and a younger woman, and even this much older woman, Lillian, whose
Mm.
story we hear. So some of the, and I think that that cliche and that prejudice, the against having an older woman protagonist,
Mm.
I think that is anti-feminist. I mean, it's
Mm.
its value. Um, we're only interested in women if they're young. So
Mm.
I think that's a problem. So I'm
Yeah.
constantly pushing up against that. That's sort of for me been more of the challenge. And luckily, I feel like there might be a little romantic plot somewhere, but it's usually not the focus. In
Yes.
my
Yes,
books.
Carol. I suspect, based on what I've read of your books, that you have a thing. You have a thing for policemen. Hmm.
Oh, well, That is true, but I'm not going to say which book. But there was a moment where I had gotten to in writing one of my books, and a policeman appeared on the scene, and I was like, "Oh no, Carol, are you going to make him the romantic hero?" And then I thought, no, all my readers are expecting that. I'm going to do something totally different with it. So not every one of the yes, but that that I think that comes from the the problem with the crime fiction is that the protagonist has to have some access to the detection, and it comes and it happens that it's the cop.
Okay. Michelle. Okay.
Trying to figure out. There we go. I hate this reverse thing. Okay.
Okay. Let's skip to another topic.
Okay.
So, in your young adult fantasy novel, The Metropolitans, Madge's mom describes her own Irish immigrant grandmother with a very telling line. Quote, "Some people called her bossy, but most just called her strong." Unquote. So similarly, readers may sometimes perceive proactive and flawed female characters as unlikable and cold, instead of lauding them as compelling and gritty, as they would do if they were male. This relates back to something you said earlier, right? Do you ever feel pressured by cultural and social expectations to make your female characters relatable and likable?
A little bit, I will say. That, I mean, although it's become, since Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, having a non-likable female character has become more acceptable. But there have been times where I think of my female narrators generally as flawed women who are basically good and basically smart, but usually, who are prone to make mistakes, and often because there's something they're not seeing. I always try to think of of each character. What is it that they're limited by? What are they going to miss? What are they missing, and why? And sometimes I will go further in the flawed direction than other times. And I have occasionally, gotten editorial comments like, "Oh no, we might not really like her if she's done this thing." And I'll think, "I've done this thing," or I haven't murdered anyone, but I'll think, I've thought a bad thought. I'm not perfect. I think there is a little pressure, honestly. And so we're always, and I'm always navigating that in terms of, I want I'm generally writing. Occasionally I have written sort of less than nice characters. I'm talking now about the central female narrator. I've written plenty of terrible people and supporting roles. But I do sometimes feel a little pushback on that. And literally, where I've negotiated back and forth in a scene, how much, was it an accident that she pushed this person over the edge? Can you rewrite this a little bit? So in fact, she really didn't do this terrible thing. So, and I've negotiated with that, back. What's interesting is a character. I like the sort of the ambiguity of, did she do that terrible thing, but I have gotten a little bit of pushback on that.
Oh, okay.
And I've pushed back a little bit too, but it's a back and forth.
It's a balance, right? At the end of the day.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the men in your books. So there are a wide range of male characters in your books, ranging from misogynistic predators to those who respect women as their equals. In both The Sea of Lost Girls and The Stranger Behind You, for example, you tackle the archetype of the older and/or powerful man abusing his male privilege, whether it is his position of authority, social capital, or wealth, to prey on women and girls. Who or what are the inspirations for these predatory male antagonists?
Oh gosh, I think I won't name names. And as I mentioned in in the essay in Stranger Behind You, where I talk about my mother's assault, I say I am
Mm,
fortunate enough not to be, and it's just fortune and dumb luck that I haven't had that experience. However, I've had many experiences of being made to feel small, and
mm,
having, encountering men in power who, were belittling, or,
mm,
abuse, especially in the experience of being a student. Um, so I've had those experiences, and believe, they stay with you. Um,
mm.
so the creepy professor who said something nasty, I think I've
Yeah.
written him in every book. Or I always feel like, there you are, there you are,
Mm,
said that really mean thing to me, and uh, so that experience has often, having had that experience, I am often aware of, and it just, I feel like I very often get to that point with a character, where that moment where somebody's in power says something really damaging to them.
mm,
And I have had that experience, and as a teacher, I am, so constantly aware of, the power that a teacher has, and how to abuse that, to take that power and make someone feel small, is
yeah.
so despicable to me. So it's one of the things that just really makes me so angry.
Mm,
um, that very often, so there are many moments in my book where that just comes up, where I feel like there's and it happens in books where, it the book I just finished, I was reaching for it, but it's not a book, it's not a book yet. Um, it happens in, books that aren't necessarily about that, but,
mhm,
that feeling of, you know, of 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 an older, professorial guy saying something belittling. Um, that happens a lot. Um,
mm.
so, and that comes from those experiences, and then experiences, of course, that I have heard other people talk about,
Yep.
um, and read about. I'm obviously very influenced by those.
Mm. So do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways mystery crime writers can break away from harmful tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women in the genre?
Well, what I hope always is to balance, these characters that are toxic, and there are characters that are toxic, because there are
Mm,
people who are, but I always try to balance them with positive male characters, and I have so many examples of positive male characters in my life, and actually, my first reader of every book is my husband.
mm,
You mentioned Lee Slonimsky, who we also co-wrote. Those three books together under Lee Carroll.
mm,
And he will read he reads chapter by chapter as I'm writing. So I get his response. And, you know, he, first of all, he's a nice man. He's somebody who would never, who's not toxic. Um,
mm.
he will point out if there's, gee, are there any nice, good men in this? And I'll go, oh no, okay. But usually there is. Usually
Mm,
there are people who are allies, and who might make mistakes as well, but
mm,
who also, you know, who are not toxic males. So I think just trying to represent them and just have them
mm,
on the page helps gives an alternate way of being.
mm,
Luckily in my life, I've met so many of those, friends, best friends from college, men that I've been friends with for 40 years.
mm.
So, I have a lot of good examples, as well as sometimes I think the bad examples are the ones that, they hurt you, so they stay with you,
Yeah.
maybe more, but I have only to think of, you know, my brothers, my, college
Mm,
friends, my husband, so, sons of friends, men out there.
So you have the good examples in your life
Yeah,
to compare
yeah,
to.
I'm
Okay.
lucky.
Yeah. Okay, so now books and stories in the mystery, crime, suspense genre usually involve some kind of violence, including violence against women. Now, rape and sexual assault, or at least the threat of it, is something that is present in many mystery crime novels and is often a major plot driver. Do you think that consent is an issue that mystery crime authors have started tackling successfully in recent years?
Um, Consent in the sense of
Having sex.
oh, so I'm not sure what you mean. Do you mean if that the scenes involve someone giving consent, and if not, then it's a violent?
Not necessarily so, but I suppose in the sense that it's quite clear that they want to do there and they want to be there
Mhm.
rather than, just the man being all alpha and like, I know you want me.
Oh, so if you're writing a scene, in other words, in which you want to make it clear whether the woman has given consent or not, is that what you're asking? I'm sorry. I'm trying. Also, since I don't write, I guess this happens in mystery fiction, but it seems also like an issue in romance fiction.
Yes.
Sort of getting away from what I imagine. And I actually, one of my best friends writes romance. And so we often talk about that, how to negotiate that line. You don't want to write a scene in which, you know, in which a woman is not consenting and that scene is something positive. So
Hmm.
I guess you would always just be, really careful about that. I think the issue of consent that comes up in that scene that I read is Lillian is, because she is seen as giving consent by being in that place, someone could say, well, you're there, so you've
Yeah.
given consent, but she clearly hasn't. Um,
Mm.
and I think, and that is made clear. And but she says afterwards, she says she was afraid of telling the story because she was afraid it would look like, I
Yes.
was stupid to have been there. So in that sense, I think I was addressing the issue of how victims feel sometimes as if they are at fault. And I very clearly want to make sure that you understand that no, that is not in that case at all. She did not give consent by being there. Um, so I think so. I'm not sure if that answers your question at all. I'm not sure if I've tackled those issues as much as, because I don't really have you know sexual scenes like that so much.
Mhm.
Do I think other mystery writers do? Most of the mystery writers I read are, I think they write scenes in which it's clear whether somebody has consented or not. I don't think they fall into
Mm.
any of the stereotypes of. I'm sure there are some, but I don't read them. I probably know that that's an issue.
Okay, but I mean, do you think that there's a difference between how male authors and female authors in the
Oh, okay.
genre handle
Okay.
rape, sexual assault, and consent?
Yes.
Mm.
Um, and so I guess, the male authors I'm thinking of quite older male authors. I'm thinking of,
Mm.
because I've been reading a fair amount of noir fiction, and again, watching those 40s movies. There you can see there is a very toxic, um, you know, there's the bad girl, good girl thing, and bad girls get what they deserve. Um,
Mm.
in terms of modern authors, again, probably don't read ones that still partake of those. I think if they partake of um, those cliches, I don't read them.
Right.
So that maybe make me a little bit limited in being able to answer or know what to how to phrase that. Um,
Mm.
I think much less. I think it's just not acceptable. I think that kind of
Mm.
tough guy or glorification of that, I think is just not so acceptable anymore. Unless there's a whole bunch of books that I'm just not as aware of. I know in the mystery community I'm in, it's very female oriented,
Mm,
in a sense.
mm,
And that I think, and I think there are just some extraordinarily powerful women in writing mystery fiction right now. And, so when I go to even what's been addressed, for instance, at conventions,
mm,
any issues with, there have been issues that have come up at conventions of people being abusive,
mm.
or condescending, but
Yep.
it's usually really addressed quickly.
Mm,
It's just not tolerated. It's just, so I feel like that probably we're in a much better place than even like 10 years ago. So I say this
mm.
with great hope. Perhaps I'm naive. There may be a lot of circumstances I don't know about, but my hope is that women are such a vocal force in mystery fiction. Um,
Mm.
and the community to me seems extremely. I belong to Sisters in Crime, which is a very,
Yes.
which does let men in. They're called Misters in Crime. They're the male allies in it.
Mm,
So I feel like things, hopefully are better in that area.
mm,
There are lots of areas where things are not better. So I am cautiously optimistic in one area. I can say that things are still pretty bad, I think, in academia, from what I hear from people I know
mm.
in the
Yeah.
thick of that. But
Yeah.
so
And
I'm not sure I answered your question, but I tried.
yeah, I think that's fair enough. And yeah, and speaking of that, so in 2018, the Staunch Prize, which is an award set up to recognize crime and thriller novels without violence against women, was launched and faced criticism from major crime novelists like Val McDermid, who believe that as long as there is violence against women in the world, it should be reflected in fiction. So, what is your take on the idea that mystery crime thriller books can work without some form of violence against women? Do you think it's feasible given some of the long standing genre conventions and tropes?
Well, certainly, I think you can have fiction that doesn't have violence towards women, but I do understand what Val McDermott, and I remember when this came up. Um, so I do have a conflicted feeling about that, because
Mm,
if you do not depict women, first of all, I think it's different how you depict them.
yes.
So you do not have to depict, graphic violent crime. It does not have to be done in any way that is gratuitous. I think
Mm,
I think one of the most important things is if you have a woman who's a victim of a crime, that we see them and know who they are, and they have a name and a face, and they're a person. They're not just, victim number three, you
yeah.
so honoring that, I think, is really important. I do think, there's a problem if you write a world in which there's no violence against women. It's not our world, obviously.
Mm,
So,
mm,
I think that it's that it if it exists in the world, it's, I think it needs to exist in fiction. Not every fiction, not every book has to be about that. But I do think, but I think what you need to be careful about is how you're representing it, and why you're representing it, and what message and what cliches that you are putting forth by
yeah.
depicting it in certain ways. So certainly it shouldn't be, it shouldn't be there for, you know, cheap thrill.
Titillating.
Tinsel, exactly. That is the word I was thinking of. You read it. Um, so yes, I think it's really important to be careful about how those, what those depictions are. Um,
Mm,
but but again, I can't imagine not having. I see Val McDermott's point. You have it. I wouldn't want to create the fiction that that women aren't, you know, that there's not violence against women, because as we know there is. So I would not want to create a world in which that a fictional world in which that didn't exist. I just would want to address it in as careful and respectful a way as I could.
mm, yeah. Yep, definitely. Okay, so let's pivot to a slightly more personal question. So, parents are usually the most influential real role models in a person's life. As a mom yourself, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
Yeah. Well, I think raising children, if you're raising a daughter or you're raising um, a female child, then, you want to raise them to be, proud and confident and, somebody who knows, what their worth is. And you want to raise, I feel like I'm being a little binary here for a second, actually. I'm thinking you're raising male, you're raising female, maybe, that shifts for some people. So,
Mm-hmm.
they may not stay in their assigned at birth gender. So I think you're raising all people to respect each other, to respect themselves and to respect each other, to treat each other with respect. I think also modeling, one of the most disturbing things I sometimes saw as I was raising my daughter and I would look, around me is sometimes watching women who um, didn't teach whose children might hit them, and they would say, "Oh, it's okay," because it's just me. I
Mm-hmm.
and I actually saw that a number of times, and I thought, you're giving them the message then that it's okay, that it's okay to hit a woman, even if you're saying, "Oh, it's just myself,
Ah,
it's just a
yes.
3-year-old," and that bothered me deeply when I saw that.
Mm,
You know, so I always was, no, you have to model respect for yourself, um,
mm,
and expect that from children of both, from all children. Um,
yes.
and that's, and model that, I guess, model that within the family, because so often it's what's in the family that, um, if children grow up seeing um, a woman mistreated, then they'll think it's
It's
okay.
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. Mm,
that is the most, I think, dangerous thing. And it happens in, you know, subtle and not subtle ways. So,
mm,
respect for, family that models respect for all the, members of that family, I think is really crucial.
okay, great. And so we've reached our final question. This is a two-parter, so I'll ask both questions at one go.
Okay.
You have been so very incredibly supportive of our Rig for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. So it's a bit of an obvious one, but why do you support the cause to end violence against women? And what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Well, I support stopping violence against women because I think, it does exist, and that, um, it's something we have to, really challenge in our society and do everything we can to stop. And to bring awareness to, because so many people, I think, do not know how much it goes on. Um, and what was the second part of the question?
What do you think that authors can do to help
Oh,
with yeah.
well, I think, again, bringing awareness that, this, as I haven't really talked too much about how I worked for 3 years at a hotline, and one of the things when I worked at that, it was a hotline for all crisis, but domestic violence cases.
Mm,
People who were experiencing domestic violence often called in, and what it really made me aware of is that this can happen to anyone. Um, one of the things I would hear so often is a woman saying, "I never thought this would happen to me." Um,
mm,
and I think when I write about women who find themselves in these situations, one of the things I really want to say is, this could be anyone. This could happen to you. It could happen to your sister. It could happen to a friend. And you may not be aware of it because there's such stigma against. So I think the most important thing an author can do is to try to remove that stigma, um,
mhm,
to tell these stories. In telling my mother's story, I felt that it was really important to say, this isn't just something we're talking about now. This is something that's happened to women, forever. Um,
Yeah.
and it's, that it could have happened to your mother.
Mm,
That to me was very important to give that message. So there, I felt like in that one example, I felt like by telling my mother's story, I was trying to convey that we don't know who this could have happened to, that
yeah.
people could have been silent for 77 years.
Mm,
I don't think my brothers knew that this had happened to my mother. Uh,
mm,
so that we should be aware that it is happening, that we should be open to hearing it, um, and and then responding and helping and stopping it. And I think anytime when something stays hidden, then we can't stop it. So bringing it to light
mm.
and then demonstrating the ways that we can um, help stop it and help women in these situations who need to leave a violent or abusive situation. Um, that's what I think is important.
Okay. So I'm going to come back on screen. Thank you so much, Carol, for that most
Yeah.
excellent session. And
Oh,
thank you, everyone, for tuning in.
thank you for
So,
such wonderful questions. They're
yeah,
really insightful. Thank you.
no, that was a that I was it was great hearing all your great answers. And so just to recap, aside from answering all our questions here today, Carol has also generously donated a whole bunch of fabulous goodies to the stash of author treats we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. And the best part is that all these goodies are available to donors worldwide. So, Carol, you're going to have to be my book model again.
Okay, I've got all these things spread out here now.
So the first bundle is the Night Visitors 50-50 matching donation treat. In this goodie, Carol is offering an unusual treat that will double the impact of your Read for Pixels donation. So donate $50 to us and Carol will not only send you a collectible, signed and personalized first edition hardcover of the Night Visitors for your reading pleasure, she will also give a matching $50 donation to the domestic violence shelter run by Family of Woodstock in Ulster County, New York, United States, where she volunteers, as she mentioned earlier. Do note that there are only 3 of this wonderful treat available. Second is the Carol Goodman Books and Map Starter Bundle. If you're new to Carol's books or are a book collector, she's offering 2 starter bundles, which include signed and personalized US edition trade paperbacks of 5 of her most recent novels: The Disinvited Guest, The Stranger Behind You, The Sea of Lost Girls, The Night Visitors, and The Other Mother, as well as one exclusive print of a map of the world of The Disinvited Guest, which is hand drawn by her daughter to accompany the book. Both Carol and her daughter will sign the map for the donor. Third is Carol Goodman's The Disinvited Guest Book and Map Bundle. So she's also offering 3 smaller book and map bundles, which feature one signed and personalized first edition hardcover of The Disinvited Guest and one exclusive print of the hand-drawn map of the world of The Disinvited Guest, which Carol and her daughter will both sign for the donor. Now, fourth is Carol Goodman's The Stranger Behind You bundle. This goodie has an extra personal touch from Carol. Aside from one signed and personalized first edition hardcover of The Stranger Behind You, she's also sending each donor a personal handwritten note. There are 2 of these bundles up for grabs. Fifth is Carol Goodman's Blythewood hardcover bundle. For those of you who don't know, the Blythewood series chronicles the coming of age of Evelyn Hall at an elite boarding school that trains young women to defend human society from the shadowy forces that live among us. So, for fans of kick-ass feminist young adult fantasy, Carol is offering signed and personalized US edition hardcovers of her Blythewood trilogy, which includes Blythewood, Ravencliff, and Hawthorne. And last but not least, you can get a signed and personalized first edition hardcover of Carol's very first book, The Lake of Dead Languages, which promises to give you a gripping and twist-filled feminist mystery to read over the coming holiday season. And it's even set mostly in winter. There are 3 of these suspenseful novels available for donors. We also have plenty of goodies available from authors like Tim LeBon, Namina Forna, Rin Chupeco, Daniel H. Wilson, Kwame Mabala, Sue Ann Jeffren, Sujata Messi, Eugene Bacon, and Charlie N. Holmberg, as well as publishers like Tall Books UK, Random House Children's Books, and more. So far, we've raised $2,030 towards our $5,000 goal so far, which is only about 40% of our target, and we are reaching the end of our fundraiser period. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends next month and help us keep our lights on. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And so you can donate to get these goodies on RallyUp at tinyurl.com/R4P RallyUp 2022. And do be careful, these are cap sensitive. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, including our past and upcoming author sessions, you can go to bit.ly/Read for Pixels. Now, the classic edition of the Pixel Project's first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, where the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Woman, is also now available in both paperback and ebook formats, with the audiobook edition set to be released next month. Additionally, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology bookplate for buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates, and it'll be first come, first serve. Each booklet includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. For more information about the anthology and how to score a bookplate, visit bit.ly/Giving the Devil His Due. For those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of the anthology, you can order it from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives, such as this one, alive and kicking. To find out more about violence against women and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. Now, Carol, I believe you have an announcement for us?
Oh, for this, my most current book. Is that the, oh, okay. So since I did not read for my most current book, this is The Disinvited Guest, which actually takes place in a future pandemic. It's about a group of people who go to stay on an island off the coast of Maine, and there are secrets that come up from our current, or from 2020, that haunt them when they're on this island. So, Invited Guest. It's the book I had to write during the pandemic.
So there, you've heard it. So go out and get it. It sounds very intriguing.
Yeah.
So to all of you tuning in, thank you very much. We've come to the end of the session. So have a good day or good night wherever you are in the world. Catch you next time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.